Hello, everyone, and we're welcome to our webinar. June is Alzheimer's and Brain Injury Awareness Month, and we at Freedomwand have been focusing our social media and our newsletter on physical and mental health benefits that come with dignified wiping and toileting and how it improves the patient outcomes for those with a TBI, which is a traumatic brain injury, or Alzheimer's. And we have with us and would like to welcome Lindsay. She's an occupational therapist for 10 years. And she's created her own company called Equip Me OT. And Lindsay is passionate about helping people bridge the gap between the hospital world and home improvement. Her goal is to help navigate the complicated tools and tasks that can be required for using medical equipment in your home. And we will post all of Lindsay's links in our newsletter. So watch the newsletter when it comes out for a follow-up. So welcome very much, Lindsay, and thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
My pleasure. So glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, how about tell us something about yourself that is not in your normal bio?
So a little bit about me. I am a gigantic water bug. I have been water skiing since I was 5 years old. So that's a favorite pastime, and I have to keep my body in high functioning order or I can't do it. So I'm highly motivated to stay active as I get older. Because I want to keep being able to do all of that stuff. So that's part of my motivation was to become a therapist in the first place, was I want to make sure everyone can enjoy those things they're passionate about well into the lifespan.
That's awesome. I used to be a water skier, believe it or not.
Awesome.
Senior in high school, I developed a really bad back and had to wear a back brace, and that was the end of water skiing. So once you have that, you can't kind of come back because it takes a lot of pull on the back.
It does.
Yes. So we have a couple questions for you. Since June is our Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, can you give us some tips or advice to clients that have a TBI or have Alzheimer's on how to care for their own toileting concerns? What is the best thing that you have found?
So there's a few factors that I always like to take into consideration. One is, what exactly is the cognitive status? If we're speaking of mild to moderate cognitive decline, whether that's memory or high-level problem solving, functional things like that, having a plan in place for how you're going to access your toileting needs and being incredibly consistent is probably the most important factor. So if we're going to be implementing the use of a medical device like the Freedomwand or like a raised toilet seat or any of that, the fact of the matter is it has to be every time. And it has to be using a consistent pattern or routine in order to make something habitual, especially when we're dealing with having to make new neural connections because of either a loss of connection from a brain injury, stroke, or that changing of brain function over time caused by dementia. It's the consistency. And so I love to see individuals who have caregivers involved who are using a piece of equipment the same way every time. So that's where an occupational therapist can come in really handy to create that pattern so that it's being carried over by everyone working with that individual. An example of that would be having the item in the same spot, hanging from a hook next to the toilet, for example, with the toilet paper prepared for how it's going to be inserted, depending on the level of assistance required, using the same verbal cueing every single time. And over time, even individuals with cognitive decline, you can see a pattern develop where they're more comfortable and less leery of using the product and can become more independent with using it and overall become more independent with their toileting needs. So consistency is so, so important.
That's awesome. And I totally agree with just going through it with my parents, and now they're both have passed away, but it was difficult to get that consistency with different caregivers. So I think it sounds to me like maybe written out instructions that anybody that comes in can follow. Those written out instructions might be really good, because my next question was, what tips and advice for toileting can you give to their caregivers? But you pretty well covered that. Do you ever find that it's helpful for a caregiver to use a toileting aid, or is it just way too cumbersome and they end up just using a gloved hand?
I have found that in order to get the maximum carryover, if we're recommending a toileting aid, that toileting aid is going to be used every single time, regardless of whether it is the person themselves using it on themselves or a caregiver using it. Again, it's all about consistency. It's all about creating this is how we toilet. not this is how I toilet sometimes. Because again, when you're talking rigid mindsets, that can be a common occurrence with individuals with brain injuries, strokes, and dementia. That very rigid thought process requires very consistent use. And yes, I do often recommend, for example, I've been implementing bidets in a lot of my situations. And I say, okay, I understand that perhaps it feels odd to use a bidet on somebody else. But if we're recommending a bidet for that person to use, for them to use, if they need help sometimes, I'm going to expect that you help them with the bidet. And that just, again, it creates a really consistent mindset and pattern. And the buy-in for everybody is so much stronger, because not only does the caregiver understand how the product is used, so that when they're asking the person they're caring for to use it independently, they get it, they understand how it functions, so they can help. And it also just creates a level of consistency that makes life abundantly easier across the entire caring perspective.
So with my parents, they didn't want to admit that they were going down the path of having Alzheimer's or dementia. My mother was much easier. My mother was like, I don't know what to do next, but she was very, very frightened. Where my father wasn't very frightened. He was just in complete and utter denial. So to try and get him to even acknowledge or be willing to use a walker just took me forever. And what I found is, by the time I finally got him where he would actually be willing to use it, it was too late, because he couldn't understand the dynamics of the brakes. He didn't understand how the wheels would roll. He didn't understand how to maneuver his weight and so that it was more dangerous. Actually, the walker was more dangerous for him than it was a help. So I had to actually take the walker away unless I was right there with him. So do you have any conversations, any sentences, anything that would help get the mindset switched over from somebody that's going down that path to be willing to use things earlier? Is there a special phrase?
I wish there was like a magic, like, and then it works. I have found the most practical way to get individuals to buy into the use of adaptive equipment is start early and make it meaningful. So one of the big things that I recommend when we're trying to implement the use of adaptive equipment, and typically you're gonna be more successful the earlier in the process you start to implement this. So oftentimes it's before they need it. Right. Making people aware, and that's kind of the mission of Equip Me OT, is to just kind of make individuals aware at even a younger age, before they have to take on caregiving responsibilities or they themselves begin to need these things, that this stuff exists. It's not scary. It's not an indication of you being sick or wrong or bad. These are things that exist to help keep us safe and independent. And if the goal is, for example, for some people, the motivation is, I will never have a family member wipe my butt. That I hear all the time. I'm like, great, I am here for that. Let's make that a priority early. We're going to hit it with our options consistently. I'm going to get you comfortable with this concept of, I am here to make sure you never have to have somebody wipe your butt. And like that can unlock a level of buy-in that is so hard to get sometimes. When it comes to mobility aids, it's the same thing. Making that mobility aid tied directly to something that motivates people. So I've had a lot of male clients specifically who are very, very resistant to using a mobility aid. And one of the things that has worked really well for me in that is tying the mobility aid to an activity that perhaps they haven't been able to do safely for a while. So I love to take, and I was very fortunate in that I was out in the community with my clients, so I was able to do some of this, but family members can take advantage of this as well. Is be like, when you use your walker, it means we can go to X. So I would be like, when you use your walker, we get to go to the Bass Pro Shop, or we get to go, we're going to be able to navigate our way out onto the dock and we'll go fishing. And like tie that particular item to a really positive emotion. And over time with consistency, that can unlock a level of buy-in as well. So it takes some creativity and really getting to know the person on a personal level before you implement just throwing a piece of equipment at them. And I think that for me is one of the most vital parts of the process, is you got to know who you're working with and what motivates them. Because even as we decline cognitively over time, as we age, we are still directly tied to those intrinsically motivating factors, whether that's visiting family or being outside or, baking, or, there's these things that unlock some potential in every mind, regardless of where they're at in their phase of dementia or cognitive change.
That's a really good picture where you can ask the question of what do you want to continue to do on your own, so that they're more in control and that it's them making these decisions versus something happening to them because of the illness, and that's a negative. So that's very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any stories, especially as it relates to either the Freedomwand specifically or a toileting aid, that helped improve the patient outcome of an Alzheimer's patient or a brain injury client, that helped them become more independent?
Absolutely. I'm a certified brain injury specialist. So brain injury work has been very near and dear to my heart since I started 10 years ago. And one of my most one of those memories that I think really hit home for me is I actually worked with a client who suffered a traumatic brain injury from a motorcycle accident. He was a very prominent member of his community. He was a musician. He was an incredible gentleman who had lost everything in a split second because of a left turn. And his cognitive status was moderately impaired, confused, very emotional. And one of the things he struggled most with was toileting. He had not been able to, and this is obviously the types of things that as a therapist, and he has allowed me to share these types of stories as he's made a wonderful recovery. But early on, he could not have a bowel movement because he could not bring himself to do it with the assistance it was going to require. And he had several fractures that also limited his mobility early on. And this was inpatient rehab. And we used the Freedomwand. This was at Mary Free Bed, and they had it on hand. And I was a new grad, not super familiar with everything that was available. So I kind of brought in every tool that was possible to help him be able to provide his own bowel hygiene care. And we set him up with the commode and the whole thing. And this gentleman had not had a comfortable toileting experience in nearly 2 months because of his injuries. And I set him up with the toileting wand, and he was able to not only have a bowel movement, but provide his own hygiene care. And the excitement this guy had about that. And I tell you, the interesting thing about it was it unlocked a level of accomplishment. And these things sound so trivial, but I can tell you from direct experience, when you can unlock an accomplishment that gives people a sense of well-being, you have created a whole new window of opportunity for growth and change. And I've seen this in brain injury. I have seen this in dementia care. I have seen this in stroke care. When you can unlock this positive emotion that is tied to accomplishment, that is tied to self-care, well-being, and all of those other factors, you have opened a window of growth. And from that point on, we saw incredible change throughout his process. He was able to return home. So it's amazing how just one thing, like being able to independently manage your own bowel hygiene, which seems trivial, but in the moment was incredibly important. And I know he continued to use it. And I believe he insisted on taking the product home with him that he used that day, because he was like, that's terrible. I wouldn't use a product. And then, so he bought the one that we had. So we had to buy a new one for the hospital. Because usually we didn't use it in actual toileting scenarios, but he was like, I have to go. And we're like, all right, this is happening. So it became his Freedomwand.
Oh, that's awesome. And I know that even though it sounds trivial, but you're independent in the bathroom since you're 2 years old. And I've heard it hundreds of times in the 15 years that I've been in business that, if you can't even wipe your butt, you're useless. So the confidence level of knowing that you can do that gives you the confidence to move forward to try something else. And we all want to have independence. We all want a closed door, while you're doing that. That's why there is closed doors, especially in the US. Oh, well, that was a wonderful story. It warms my heart to know that, a tool like that has helped people. So that was my mission, is just to help people have a more active, independent lifestyle. So that's awesome. Is there anything else that you would like to add? We have just a little bit of time left.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from an generalized equipment kind of conversation, I am so grateful for the OT community who has been so integral in creating these types of products. that are well thought out and considerate of these important daily functions. So as a therapist, I implore people to explore what's out there and get to know what types of equipment, because the sooner you become well versed in these things, the sooner you can start implementing them with yourself or your loved ones. And it makes the process of issuing equipment when it's necessary so much easier if it's already been something you've been exposed to early on. So I cannot underscore this enough, but early exposure to equipment and making it less stigmatized in the process will make your, the rest of the process go so much easier, especially with Alzheimer's and dementia. If you notice some changes, just kind of starting to introduce things, make them visibly present in the home, can make a huge difference. So I do, if you don't follow me, if you don't see my stuff, that would be a great place to start, because that's kind of what I do, just show you what's out there.
Well, that's awesome. And that's what we try to do with you as our occupational therapist, because you're our number one voice, because that's what you help people with. So we like to offer free webinars for any staff to go through. We give you a free demo kit for your supply closet that you can use with your patients that are, fully dressed, and you can see what their range of motion does and how their hand movement and dexterity and all of that, and what size they would need. So we try and do that as much as we can. So if any of you OTs are out there and you want a free webinar, just contact us at freedomwand.com, and email sales, or just contact us through our website, and we will set that up and get that out to you. But thank you so much, Lindsay, and have an enjoyable summer hanging out at the water. That's awesome.
I will. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're such a blessing. So you have a wonderful summer, and thank you again.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.